Hello, and welcome to Hadassah Magazine Presents, a joint program of Hadassah Magazine and Hadassah's Engagement Division. I'm Lisa Hostein, the executive editor of Hadassah Magazine. I'm so delighted to be devoting this program to strong women with chutzpah. And I'm especially thrilled to be in conversation with Mayim Bialik, whose kind of chutzpah we need more of these days on several levels. Along with Julie Silverman and Tami Schlossberg Pruwer, the co-authors of Chutzpah Girls, 100 Tales of Daring Jewish Women. It's a beautifully illustrated anthology from which I learned about some courageous and fascinating Jewish women I had never even heard of before. As this book shows, chutzpah has long been a feature of Jewish life, including and perhaps especially among women, from biblical times to the present. Women who have often needed that quality both to survive and to thrive in good times and in bad. It's noteworthy that we come together today at the conclusion of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, when we honor the memory of the 6 million Jews who were slaughtered during the war. We will discuss in the course of the program some of the female heroes of the Holocaust, some whose daring and courageous acts saved many lives. If you are a Hadassah member, or if you know anything about the organization at all, you know a little something about women with chutzpah. From Henrietta Szold, the founder of our organization, who also was instrumental in saving thousands of Jewish children from the Nazis through Youth Aliyah, to the women who continue to sustain the largest Jewish women's organization in the United States today, and by the way, still own 2 major hospitals in Israel, Hadassah women are making a difference in so many ways. If you're joining us for the first time, a special welcome, and I hope you'll take the time to learn more about the organization and the healing work it does in Israel, the United States, and around the world. If you're not already a member, please consider joining so you can enjoy the magazine, which is free with membership, as well as all the wonderful programming the magazine and the rest of Hadassah provides. And of course, your donations for both this event and all of Hadassah's work are always welcome and valued. Links for both membership and donations are in the chat box. We welcome audience questions throughout the conversation. Please be sure to write them in the Q&A. The chat box is where we disseminate information, including links to more about our panelists and their work, and including a link to buy Chutzpah Girls with a discount code. And be sure to stay on to the very end when I will announce the lucky person who was chosen randomly to win a complimentary copy of Chutzpah Girls. Now to introduce our special guests. Mayim Bialik is best known for her lead role as Blossom Russo in the early 1990s NBC television sitcom Blossom. She also played the role of Amy Farrah Fowler on the critically acclaimed CBS comedy The Big Bang Theory, a role for which she won 2 Critics' Choice Awards, 4 Emmy nominations, and a SAG Award nomination. She served as host of Jeopardy for 2 seasons, earning her 5th Emmy nomination for her contribution to the iconic show, which won its first Primetime Emmy the year she hosted. She currently hosts a popular mental health podcast, Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, with over 60 million downloads, and which just this week won 2 Webby Awards. Mazel tov. Mayim holds a BS and PhD in neuroscience from UCLA, and she has authored 4 books, 2 of which were New York Times bestsellers, Girling Up, How to Be Strong, Smart, and Spectacular, and Boying Up, How to Be Brave, Bold, and Brilliant. Also with us are Julie Silverstein and Tami Schlossberg Pruwer, the co-authors of Chutzpah Girls, which includes Mayim as one of the featured 100 Daring Women. Julie is a speechwriter and messaging strategist who has written for the Ambassador of Israel to the United Nations, the Foreign Minister of Israel, and many companies and nonprofits. A graduate of UCLA and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, she was a Fulbright Fellow and participated in the Wexner Heritage Fellowship and in the Bertelsmann German-Israeli Young Leaders Exchange. She grew up in San Francisco and now lives in Jerusalem with her husband and 5 children. Tami Schlossberg Pruwer, in addition to her co-authorship of Chutzpah Girls, has a background as a brand strategist who led award-winning campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, governmental institutions, and nonprofits. Tami was born in Milan, grew up in Antwerp, is a graduate of Bar-Ilan University and Reichman University, and is fluent in 7 languages. She now lives in Tel Aviv with her husband and 2 children. Welcome to you all. I'm really delighted to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
So there's so much to talk about. Feels really refreshing to be able to focus on positive Jewish female role models during these often dark days. So Mayim, I want to start with you. You had a brilliant career. And full disclosure, my son Sam and I were huge fans of The Big Bang Theory, which highlighted one aspect of your brilliance, the scientific piece. And you also have a few special Hadassah connections. In 2023, you were named to Hadassah's inaugural list of 18 American Zionist women you should know. But perhaps the biggest sensation around the Hadassah world came a few years ago when you were hosting Jeopardy! And lo and behold, Hadassah was actually the answer, I guess I should say question, to one of the clues, which described the organization. So is it accurate to assume that you really didn't have anything to do with that creation of that question?
Well, first of all, thank you for all of your kind words, and thank you for having me here. Really excited to be here with Julie and with Tami. And what you left out of my bio is that Julie and I were friends at UCLA. So we have a longstanding connection and a lot of Jewish advocacy that we did together as students. And also, I was the musical director and probably yelled at Julie about singing, and I hope she doesn't hold a grudge. Anyway, very glad to be here. Happy to answer that question. I had nothing to do with any of the questions or clues from Jeopardy! Little known fact, there are writers at Jeopardy! And they are, several of them are Jewish. And one of them is actually the son of a prominent scholar in Yiddish. So any questions that were like Jewish or Yiddishkeit related were likely more to do with just, the counterbalancing of clues that goes on. And we did have writers who knew a lot about those things. Those were categories that tended to be easier for me to think about, remember, or pronounce, because unlike Tami, I don't speak 7 languages. And a lot of Jeopardy! Clues are French. Alex Trebek was French Canadian, and so there's a lot in French, and I don't know how to pronounce many lakes in many parts of the world. So I could have used Tami's prowess, I guess.
I'll be on the show next time.
Well, perhaps I should note that none of the contestants actually got the answer correctly, but you, with a smile, said, I knew that. So, Mayim, you've clearly demonstrated a lot of chutzpah throughout your life, but I want to start by asking you to share with us what you see as the most chutzpahdik thing you have ever done, either professionally or personally.
I mean, there's many things that I've done, I guess, that are chutzpahdik, as we say. That is the adjective. I had my son. I'm actually currently in my podcast studio, but I used to live in this house, and I gave birth to my son in the next room, and I was by myself until pushing, which, for those of us who are like natural birth people, like it's a very chutzpahdik thing to do. But for sure, it was a very empowering, and particularly exciting moment in my life and presumably in his as well. So there's a lot of decisions around parenting that we all have to make. Many of mine were considered chutzpahdik, I guess. I think, Jewish advocacy is definitely something that has resonated as chutzpahdik. But, to be honest, I never thought of it that way. I think a lot of chutzpah, which I think the book really demonstrates, really just comes from, the essence of who all of us are, and situations arise that require, different kinds of bravery and different kinds of boldness. So yeah, I think there's many aspects, but I guess those stand out.
Well, those are all important. And in fact, that leads me to my next question for you, which was, long before October 7th, you have been loud and proud about your connection to Israel and your Jewish identity. And that authenticity and tenacity has earned you tremendous respect, admiration, and appreciation in the larger Jewish community. And like you said, it doesn't seem like you should need chutzpah to defend Israel and the Jewish people against terrorism and anti-Semitism, but you really have been an outlier, one of too few even Jewish celebrities who have been willing to speak up. So I want to ask you, when you first started seeing the post-October 7th response and the way the world kind of turned against Israel, what was your first response? And did you have to think about how public you could or should be and what the reception to what you said would be?
I think my first response felt, I think, the most like grief. And it kind of felt like a deep global, communal, historical grief. Many people would call that trauma, the intergenerational trauma that some of the greatest research about this has actually come out of Israel, and universities in Israel were some of the first to explore what PTSD looked like and what trauma looks like from generation to generation. So yeah, I can't say I was surprised. Unfortunately, I was not surprised, but the level, of hatred, the places that so many that we had considered, allies as a community being silent, felt like a kind of grief. But as Julie can tell you, in our time at UCLA, we started experiencing what was in the works, in terms of delegitimizing the state of Israel, reframing the definition of Zionism, things like that. So it had been something that obviously I was very aware of. And, I had been getting hate and threats for years before October 7th, from any time that I ever mentioned anything Jewish, even nothing political. A lot of my family is in Israel, and yes, that's a place that I visit. And so, even when I would post neutral pictures of me in places well within the Green Line, I was kind of used to that for years. I think for all of us and for kind of global Jewry, there was an extreme exacerbation of, conversation around Jews, obviously since October 7th. But unfortunately, it is the oldest hatred. And I do hold, as many do, that we're the canary in the coal mine. Nothing good happens when people turn on Jews.
Right. I want to pursue this a little later in the conversation, but I do want to turn to Chutzpah Girls and ask you, Mayim, first, what was your reaction when Julie and Tami reached out to you and said they want to include you in 100 Jewish daring women?
Well, it's you can't really say like you're a humble person because that's not humble, but I definitely felt unworthy, and still I think to a certain extent feel kind of, shocked and like beyond honored and flattered to be included, with these other women. It was the visual aspect, the design aspect that really kind of struck me and really, made me so excited in terms of the way the information was being presented. I love the illustration of me, and I thought that was really, really special. And I really liked the aesthetic, of the book, because I think that if we want to especially reach younger people, I felt that this book was really approaching this topic in a way that was visually exciting, visually engaging. And like I said, I have a relationship with Julie and was just so thrilled to see what she's working on and to be a part of that. But yeah, it feels really, really special. And I'm more interested in the other 99 women than myself.
Well, we're going to get to some of those. But so Julie and Tami, first, I really want to thank you both. Everybody should know that it's the middle of the night for them, but they were willing to stay up late or wake up early, however you want to put it, to be with us. So we really appreciate that. And we'll try to keep this stimulating so you can stay awake. So this really, as Mayim said, it's a beautiful and inspiring book that it seems geared toward younger girls and children, but really everyone can enjoy. So tell us, each of you, what inspired you to create this book. Julie, you go first.
Sure. Lisa, Mayim, and everyone joining us, it's so great to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and what brought me to write this book. I grew up in the United States, a link in a chain of strong Jewish women. My own mother was a first-generation American who became a doctor of pharmacy and later went back to school to become a rabbi and a cantor. Her mother, as a child in Germany, confronted the Gestapo, the Nazi police, to demand the release of her father from unjust imprisonment. Her mother, my great-grandmother, fled fascism with the clothes on her back, arriving in a new country with nothing but an empty suitcase. So these acts of chutzpah, the audacity to survive and to fight for a better life, are what bind the generations of my family. And yet it was apparent to me that too few strong Jewish women played a leading role in our stories, both the ones told in the broader world and within the Jewish world as well. As a mother of 5 children, both daughters and sons, growing up in today's challenging times, I felt a deep need to address this long-standing historical bias and make our Chutzpah Girls a light for this generation. And this crystallized into a personal mission after my two eldest children had their B'nai Mitzvah. First, my son Matan, and then about a year later, my daughter Noah. They both prepared for their big days in equal measure, leading the prayer service, reading Torah, delivering a Devar Torah, but they were met with an unequal response from our community, which by all accounts is highly educated and progressive. While my son received holy books, a personalized Siddur, a Tanakh, a Tefillin set, my daughter received mostly jewelry and a few handbags. Look, gifts are, of course, they're just things, right? They're just things, but they're also expressions of our values. And these gifts said to me, our community wanted my son to be learned and ambitious, and my daughter to be beautiful and to be demure. So I understood that even in this generation, there are gaps in the ways we regard our boys and girls, be they overt or even subconscious. And then Tami and I, we met by chance, both writers, mothers, lovers of Jewish history. We started collecting stories during the pandemic. And then during the war here in Israel, where we live, I'm in Jerusalem, Tami is in Tel Aviv. And when the world felt dark and uncertain, we found hope and courage in these women who had overcome double discrimination, discrimination as women and discrimination as Jews. And we decided to write a different kind of book, not another compendium of great Jewish heroes, but in its essence, a collection of stories that explore how to overcome challenge, and that takes chutzpah. We know that every person on this call has had to overcome challenges in their life, and we believe that everyone can find strength in these stories, in these chutzpah girls.
Very wonderful journey to this book. Tami, what's your story and what was different about your inspiration?
Well, Lisa, honestly, it's similar to Julie's. I was reflecting on this today. Here in Israel, we mark Yom HaShoah with a siren in the morning. And on my mother's side of the family, we know of 225 family members who perished in the Holocaust. And, 2 minutes is never nearly enough to think of them all. And this morning, I was actually thinking of my great-grandmother, one who I had the privilege of knowing growing up. And I think it was, around the same age that I am today, where she fled the Nazis with her young family. She arrived safely in Switzerland, but her husband wasn't allowed to join her. And instead of being crippled by fear, she petitioned the authorities every single day for 2 years to reunite her family. And she succeeded. And at the exact same time, another great-grandmother of mine was living in Seattle. She was a young widow, a mother of young children, at a time where not many women were working outside of the home. And she decided to take charge of her life and shape her own destiny. And she became one of the first Jewish entrepreneurs in Seattle, female entrepreneurs, one of the first women to obtain a driver's license. And I think, being raised with these stories of strong matriarchs, women who have faced unimaginable darkness and have risen from the ashes in ways that are almost impossible to understand for us. It felt so inspiring growing up, and there was this great dissonance between the stories I was hearing in my own family and then the handful of Jewish iconic women that we were learning about in school. And I think becoming a mother added another layer to this for me as well. When my daughter was born, we received many children's books about remarkable women, but the stories and the values of Jewish women were missing. And, as Julie mentioned, Jewish women have faced double, sometimes triple discrimination as women, as Jews, as immigrants. And so it made sense that they weren't being represented in mainstream literature. And I think that is what sparked my curiosity to learn more. And, once we started researching, the stories we uncovered were phenomenal. And, in the spirit of today, I'd love to share one. It's a story of Emmy Noether, who was a brilliant mathematician in 20th century Germany. And she was actually instrumental in the development of Einstein's theory of relativity. She revolutionized the fields of maths and physics, and most people that we encounter have never heard of her. And she did this all while facing discrimination as a woman and as a Jew. She was forbidden from pursuing an academic degree. She somehow convinced the university to just let her sit in on classes, and quietly and under the radar managed to obtain a doctorate. She then insisted on teaching, which, of course, was unheard of, but she was so excellent that they let her teach on condition that she wouldn't receive any compensation or payment. And after all of that, after that battle to finally achieve what she wanted, she was banned from teaching because she was a Jew. But she never gave up. And, I think even today, when we look at the anti-Semitism and women's rights being jeopardized, this is still another level of discrimination that's hard to grasp, even for us today. And despite it all, she powered through, and she revolutionized the world. And I think that was really our goal, to turn these revolutionary women into household names, to ensure that our children are raised with the stories of these strong Jewish role models who have had immense contributions on the world.
Maybe we should back up for a second and just discuss the definition of chutzpah. I think we all have a sense of what it is. I'd like to know how you define it in the book and why it's particularly relevant today. I think you both touched on that a little bit, but Tami, why don't you tell us how it's defined in the book?
Sure. Well, I'll start by reading the definition to you, and then maybe I'll elaborate. So the way we define chutzpah in the book is a Jewish superpower, the daring to speak when silenced, to take action when others won't, to try when they say it's impossible, to persevere in times of doubt, to be yourself when it's easier to conform, to stand tall when made to feel small, to believe when it all feels hopeless, and to shine your light in the face of darkness. And what I love about this definition, and Mayim alluded to this before as well, is that I think it highlights the fact that there isn't just one type of chutzpah, and I think you'll see that reflected in the diversity of the women in the book. Some are loudly fierce, some are quietly fierce, some use the power of the word, and some use the power of the sword. Some are Nobel Prize winners, and others are stay-at-home moms, but they each connected to their own unique brand of chutzpah and had the courage to live it out in the world. And I think that's a really powerful message for the moment in time that we find ourselves in. These are dark days, not just for Israel, but for the Jewish people. And this war is being waged on so many fronts. It's physical, it's military, it's psychological, it's virtual, it's spiritual. And we all have a responsibility to contribute, but also an opportunity to do that. And I think, having the courage to connect to your own brand of chutzpah will allow us to be so much more impactful. I think another reason why chutzpah is really important today is because we need to reclaim our narrative and shift it from victimhood to heroism. Just this morning, I was preparing my kids. They're 6 and 3 years old, and they were about to head out to school. And I told them that when they hear the siren this morning, for Yom HaShoah, they shouldn't be scared and they don't need to run to shelters. This siren is about, commemorating their ancestors who were being killed by other bad people 80 years ago. And I couldn't believe that I was even uttering those words. And I can't believe that we've normalized this as the discourse that we have with our children. And I think it's really important to balance the stories of trauma and of adversity with stories of resilience and heroism. This is the generation that is going to write the next chapter in our history. And we need to make sure that they're able to face it with pride and strength and resilience. After the definition, we also have a quote from the Talmud, which to us, I think, really embodied why chutzpah is so important, specifically for Jewish women. And the Talmud says, Rabbi Zeira says, "Come and see what chutzpah the land of Israel has, that it produces fruit in barren land." And I think to us, that really summed it up so beautifully, that audacity to thrive and blossom despite the hardships, and to show up in a space where nobody is expecting to see you, which is what Jewish women have had to do throughout history throughout the generations was a powerful reminder, and I think a strong affirmation that Judaism agrees.
Mm. That was one of the most interesting revelations for me from the book, that it actually was mentioned in the Talmud. I mean, I thought it was Yiddish roots, right? Isn't that like what most people thought, probably? Mayim, do you have any thoughts about the meaning and relevance of chutzpah, particularly today?
Yeah. There's something chutzpahdik that I didn't mention before, that I haven't really talked about publicly, but I chose not to cross a picket line when I was on Jeopardy. There was a Writers Guild strike and a Screen Actors Guild strike, and I made the choice not to cross the picket line. And I remember I said to my children the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quote, which is that the measure of a man or a woman is not where he stands, when it's convenient and comfortable, but it's where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. And to me, that dovetails very nicely. And I would not be surprised if Dr. King did not pull that from the Talmud, because that really is it. There are many ways, to be chutzpahdik, but the specialness of doing that when it's challenging, when it's controversial, and when it's not convenient, or as Tami said, showing up in places that you wouldn't be expected to be, that really rings particularly true. And, it was a difficult conversation. My children are 16 and 19. But yeah, it was a conversation about what if. What if you stand up for something and it costs you a great amount? What if standing up for Israel costs you a great amount? Yeah, I've lost work. We've lost sponsorships, because of controversy regarding me. And that's literally the price of chutzpah, right?
Have you lost sponsorships and work, do you think, specifically because of Israel too, or some of the other issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think being considered a dangerous liability to me is a badge of courage as a Jewish woman. To me, that's good trouble. That's making good trouble, and for me, we should not be asked, to choose between Zionism and the values of humanity. And to me, they're not mutually exclusive. So I can hold all of those things. A lot of times people ask women, they don't ask men as much. How do you do so many things? How do you think so many things? How do you have so many opinions? Because I do, because that's how we're all made. So to me, again, when Julie and Tami approached me, to me, I don't think of anything exceptional, right, about me the way I think these other women are exceptional. It's just sort of, doing the next indicated thing in the name of, literally just who I think God, intends us to be.
Mm. I wonder what each of you think, whether it's possible to develop chutzpah, or it's something that you either got or don't.
I mean, I think you can develop it. If anyone who's had timid children who teaches them to speak up when something's wrong, is teaching sort of the principles. But I do think that some people are more inclined, to have a certain drive. But as I think the book shows, circumstances, will create enough tension. It takes a lot of pressure, to find the diamond in coal. A tremendous amount of pressure and strain, can also produce things that, and I think anyone who's female, anyone who's a mom or who has, tried to interact with small people knows that sometimes you have to gather strength in places that you didn't expect, as Tami said.
Mm-hmm. Julie or Tami, do either of you have a thought about that, whether you can develop a chutzpah?
Well, Lisa, I think as women, we're often so conditioned to please and to do what's expected of us. And I think it's even more important for us to just cut out all the noise and connect to the chutzpah that we have. I certainly think that it can be developed, but I think it's inherent in everyone. Sometimes it's just about cutting out the noise and making sure that you're living for you and true to your values and not what everybody else is expecting of you.
Yeah. Well, I do want to get to some of the other women profiled in the book, because there are so many interesting ones, and obviously we can't touch upon them all. But I want to start, maybe not surprisingly, with Henrietta Szold. So the founder of Hadassah, she's featured in Chutzpah Girls. And in fact, she's one of only 4 Jewish women in history who also appear in several other recent anthologies of strong Jewish women. So the others are Golda Meir, Emma Lazarus, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, by the way, notes that Henrietta Szold is was one of her inspirations. So clearly a woman of major chutzpah, major accomplishment. Julie, much of our audience, I'm sure, is aware of her history. I know that even as I've been at the magazine for 10 years, every year I learn a little bit more, and I'm just wowed by the strength and breadth of her accomplishment and her chutzpah. What do you see as her unique brand of chutzpah, Julie?
Well, we know that many of you joining this program are lifelong supporters of Hadassah and proud members like I am myself, and you know who Henrietta Szold is, but we can, I think, take a second look at her story through the lens of chutzpah. So Henrietta was born in 1860 in Baltimore. She's the oldest of 8 daughters of a respected rabbi. She's deeply learned herself. And she applies to attend college at the Jewish Theological Seminary and actually becomes the very first female student, but was only accepted on the condition that she not seek rabbinic ordination. After college, she establishes the first American night school to provide English language instruction and vocational skills to Jewish immigrants in her hometown of Baltimore. But she increasingly understands that assimilation into American society is not a complete answer to anti-Semitism, and the Jewish people need a homeland. And this is really quite remarkable because 1 full month before Theodor Herzl published his writings, the man who we regard as the founder, the father of modern Zionism, Henrietta, describes in her writings a vision of a Jewish state in the land of Israel as a place to ingather diaspora Jewry and revive Jewish culture. And she makes plans to take her first trip to the land of Israel, and her friends tease her. They say, once you visit and you see the condition of this place, you might not be such a Zionist anymore. And they're only partially right, because what Henrietta sees does horrify her. There's an utter lack of basic health care, and she sees children with so many flies in their eyes and without the strength to wipe them away. But Henrietta isn't dissuaded. Instead, at the age of 52, when most people are settling into a quieter chapter of life, she founds Hadassah, what would go on to become the largest Jewish women's organization in the world. She mobilizes thousands of Jewish women across America. She raises funds, sends nurses, doctors, supplies to build hospitals, fights disease, creates lasting institutions of care. Later, as you mentioned, she helped lead Youth Aliyah, which rescued over 30,000 Jewish children from Nazi Europe. So Henrietta's brand of chutzpah, as Tami said, there are many different kinds. Hers is not brash, it's not defiant, it's not audacious. Her chutzpah lays in drawing on her unique emotive capacity as a woman to see the suffering of others and to refuse to look away. So she blends compassion with tenacious action and has the audacity to imagine a Jewish state grounded in the health and dignity of all.
You're hired. We've got to get this woman at Hadassah. One interesting side note that I learned not that long ago, that the reason that she founded Hadassah and ultimately did all that she did for Israel, including establishing the beginning of the medical system there, was because she was coming out of a very deep depression of unrequited love. Interesting, right? Anyway, thank you for that, because I think she really is an example for sure. And there are lots of other women featured in Chutzpah Girls, and as you note, her role in Youth Aliyah and saving all those Jewish children from across Europe. So there are other women who are mentioned that also were very involved with saving lives during the Holocaust. Some of them actually survived and some of them didn't. So Julie, do you want to tell us about one or two of those?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for this question, Lisa. I mean, Yom HaShoah was observed here in Israel today to memorialize the murder of 6 million of our Jewish brothers and sisters. And this is a shattering day for me personally, both as the granddaughter of refugees of Nazi Germany and the great granddaughter of two beautiful souls who perished, my great grandmother Ethel, who was murdered in Auschwitz, and my great grandfather Nathan, who was murdered in Theresienstadt. And it's interesting to note that International Holocaust Remembrance Day actually takes place in January, and it marks the liberation of Auschwitz by Allied sources. But Yom HaShoah, which is Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day, takes place on the day that marks the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So this day actually focuses on Jewish resistance. And our book, Chutzpah Girls, includes several women whose lives were shaped by the Holocaust: Anne Frank, Edith Eiger, Giselle Braca, Margaret Ray, Maria Altman. But I'll focus on one who exemplifies the spirit of Yom HaShoah, and this was a resistance fighter by the name of Zivia Lubetkin. So Zivia is born in 1914 in what is now Belarus, and she becomes a passionate Zionist leader before the war. When the Nazis invaded Poland, she actually refuses to flee. And instead, she bravely leaves a safer area of Poland to enter the ghetto and organize the Jewish underground. She becomes the only woman in the high command of the Jewish fighting organization, which led the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in April 1943, exactly 82 years ago today. Zivia stood in the sewers beneath the burning ghetto and gave voice to Jewish defiance. She said, "We will not go like sheep to the slaughter." And she faced impossible odds, young fighters with pistols and homemade grenades against tanks and machine guns, and they resisted for nearly a month. When the revolt was ultimately crushed, Zivia led survivors through the sewers to safety on the other side of the city, but her story doesn't even end there. She continues her resistance work with Jewish partisans. She helps smuggle Holocaust survivors to safety, and eventually she makes her way to Israel. She makes Aliyah, and she becomes one of the founders of Kibbutz Lohamei Hagetaot, the Ghetto Fighters Kibbutz, which is a community in northern Israel in the Western Galilee, created by and for survivors, where Holocaust memory and Jewish resilience live side by side. And that legacy of chutzpah didn't stop with her. Her granddaughter, Roni Zuckerman, became the first female jet pilot in the Israeli Air Force. So I love to think of it as one generation fighting underground, the next generation soaring with speed and strength in the air over a sovereign Jewish state. And so Zivia reminds us that even in the darkest moment of Jewish history, there were women who led, who fought. They believed in a future worth building. And her chutzpah was not only in resisting evil, but in fiercely believing in a Jewish tomorrow and doing everything to make it possible. And her granddaughter is that living proof.
Very powerful. You know, a very close friend of mine actually was at Auschwitz today with the March of the Living, which happens annually to mark Yom HaShoah. And she's actually the daughter of an Auschwitz survivor also. And this was not her first time at Auschwitz, but she wrote a very poignant text to her friends where she said, "This time at Auschwitz was so much more difficult and so much more horrific post-October 7th, knowing that we were marching together with some released hostages from Gaza and wondering aloud, what does never again mean?" So, Tami, I want to get to you because I know there are a couple of profiles in the book of women who had very significant roles in October 7th. So do you want to highlight one or two of those for us?
Sure. You know, Lisa, I think, of course, October 7th just amplified the urgency of our mission. We were all so deeply hurt and stunned by the deafening silence of the women's organizations who were meant to protect all women and girls. And I think we've all witnessed this year that it does not include Jewish women, unfortunately. And, you know, for us, it really mattered that if they try to erase us, it is our responsibility to celebrate ourselves even louder. And the book was about to go to print when October 7th happened, and we held it back. We decided to include at least two profiles of some of the heroines on the day of October 7th. We included the story of Inbal Lieberman, who saved her entire kibbutz. She was was a part of Kibbutz Nir Am and mobilized herself that morning and the entire security team, and not one person in her kibbutz got injured. And of course, the legendary cookie Safta Rachel Edrei, who many have heard of. Terrorists infiltrated her home and she engaged with them. She hosted them graciously. She served them cookies and tea on that morning. She attended to their wounds, and all the while she was secretly communicating with the security forces outside, telling them how many terrorists are in the house and how to enter the home in order to be able to save her own life and her husband's life. And of course, these are only two stories, and I think the past year we've been flooded with stories of heroines, not just on October 7th, but throughout this entire year. And we hope to tell these stories as well, whether it's through the next book or other mediums. They're all worth telling and taking pride in. And I think, on a personal level, creating this book leading up to October 7th has really strengthened us both tremendously. The stories of the women in the book served as a really stark reminder that Jewish women have faced dark moments before, and we've always found ways not only to survive, but also to thrive and to play active roles in safeguarding and rebuilding and nurturing and inspiring. And I think, entering this period armed with that inspiration and that knowledge has made a tremendous difference to us. And the book has taken on a completely different scope. If, to begin with, we wanted to rectify an historical bias about the stories of Jewish women, I think now it's really more about owning that narrative of resilience, of chutzpah, and reminding the next generation that we will prevail no matter what.
Very powerful. I know that also in the book, you really made a very strong attempt to have global geographic and time diversity. So I'm curious a little bit about the research process and how you kind of arrived at these 100. How did you whittle it down to 100 of all the women, including biblical women in Jewish history?
Well, it started with brainstorming Jewish women we knew, but it quickly expanded into global archives, academic journals, oral histories. We consulted with scholars. We scoured footnotes. Some figures like Esther, Golda Meir, Ruth Bader Ginsburg were obvious, and others like Asenath Baratzani, the 17th century Kurdish Rosh Yeshiva, or Flora Sassoon, a Baghdadi Indian businesswoman, required digging. And that was important to us because we wanted you to feel, the reader to feel, okay, yeah, there's women we know in the book, there's a sense of familiarity, but we also wanted to inculcate a sense of curiosity and discovery that you would encounter many women and names that you'd never heard of before. And we wanted to include Mizrahi, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Ethiopian, Bukharian, Persian voices. The Jewish story is global, and so are our heroines. And the women in the book span over 30 different countries. They're across professional fields. They represent the wide-ranging Jewish experience. And for us, this wasn't just trying to check boxes. We were reclaiming a fuller, truer picture of Jewish history, one that includes all of us.
Mayim, do you have any Jewish women in history that have influenced you, that have spoken to you?
I mean, I was educated by Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller at UCLA, and so he was my Rav, and really for me the foundation of Jewish learning in general, but in particular making it a female-centered experience as someone for whom feminism was so important to me when I came into college. I happened to be a person who took on a lot of observance and was fairly observant, in my time in college and grad school and through my marriage. So for me, I do get a lot from liturgical women. And, I resonate very deeply with not necessarily creating new midrash, but in deeply understanding the liturgical stories that sort of, many of us were raised with, but didn't get enough emphasis on. Always was particularly interested in Deborah for a lot of obvious reasons. I think I'll leave it there and see what happens next year.
Deborah, of course, was an important judge in the Bible, right? So you've all mentioned motherhood. You all have children. So I want to ask all of you, especially as we're approaching Mother's Day, at least in this country. And by the way, Mother's Day in Israel for many years was marked on the death of Henrietta Szold, which shows the impact that she had, which is also interesting. So, but what did we want to convey? You've touched on this a little bit, but I also want you to all address this. What do we want to convey to our children and grandchildren about the importance of chutzpah? Julie, you go first.
Well, this might be a nice opportunity to share a Chutzpah girl who's near and dear to my heart. And her name is Gluckel of Hameln. And she writes about this. And with your permission, I'll share a little bit about who she was and her connection to motherhood and to inculcating these same values of chutzpah. And I think she's a role model for every busy woman out there. You'll appreciate her. So Gluckel lived in the 17th century in Germany. She was married at the age of 14. She had 14 children, 11 of whom survived. She helped run a successful trading business with her husband, and he dies suddenly, and she takes over the entire operation. She's traveling, she's negotiating, she's managing finances, all while raising her children and keeping her household afloat during a very turbulent time for European Jewry. And what amazes me even more is that in the midst of all of this, Gluckel finds the time to write her story. Over the course of her adult life, she composes 7 volumes of a handwritten diary in Yiddish for her children. It's part memoir, it's part ethical will, it's part family chronicle. She wasn't writing for public recognition. She never imagined her diaries would be published. She was writing to ensure that her children and their grandchildren and their children knew where they came from and what mattered and how to hold on to their Jewish identity through hardship, how to have chutzpah. And her brand of chutzpah was not audacious. It was deeply personal. She chose to preserve her story at a time when most women's lives went undocumented. And in doing so, she preserved a rare and invaluable window into Jewish women's lives in early modern Europe. And here is a remarkable coda to her story that I have to mention, which is that her great-granddaughter was Bertha Pappenheim, and she was the founder of the Jewish feminist movement in Germany and a powerful advocate for women and children, very much like Henrietta Szold. And so we see that her legacy didn't stop with her writing. It helped ignite a multi-generational lineage of Jewish female leadership. And we understand that simply telling our stories can be a radical and powerful act of chutzpah.
Mm-hmm. Tami, do you want to take a
sure. I mean, Lisa, yes, it's such a beautiful question, and I think I'd love to pay tribute to another mother in the book. She was actually a stay-at-home mom of 10. Her name is Eliza Davis, and she moved to Jamaica from the UK. She was the daughter of a cantor, and she ends up moving into Charles Dickens' former home. Charles Dickens at the time was the most celebrated, most popular author in the United Kingdom, and just like everyone else, she loves reading his books until she comes across the character of the Jew Fagin in Oliver Twist, and he is portrayed as a very negative character, and this negative stereotype of the Jew, really, she defines it as a stab in the heart every single time she reads it. And in the little research that we found about her, she's described as an averagely educated woman, as a clumsy writer, but she picks up her pen and she challenges Charles Dickens. And the exchange of letters that we find between her and between Charles Dickens is actually the largest exchange of letters that anyone has found between him and anyone outside of his immediate circle. So he really engages with her, and she manages to change his mind. And he then revises Oliver Twist, and in his future books also incorporates Jewish characters that are depicted positively. And, I think in this day and age, with so much anti-Semitism and so much hatred, to read a story about a woman who even manages to change his mind is just unfathomable. And the fact that she's able to do this through respectful dialogue and the power of her pen in the polarized world that we live in is so inspiring. And so I think that we can all learn something from her and pass that on to our children.
That's beautiful. Really quite a story. Mayim, what do you think?
I think I was thinking back to when I was at UCLA, and I started a women's Rosh Chodesh group with a friend of mine. And at the time, it was considered this crazy thing, to emphasize and celebrate the role of women, in this way. And I kind of think about that. That's how a lot of kind of Jewish learning and thinking is framed for many of us, that men learn about men and women learn about men, and then women learn about women. And I think especially raising two boys, and, raising feminists, I think it's important to use these kinds of stories as evidence that these are stories for everyone. This is not a book for girls. This is a book for people who want to understand an aspect of Jewish history and the ongoing, constantly, being created history that we're part of. And I think for me, that's sort of, the significance of these stories, and in particular, the way they're presented. The notion is not that these are things that only women should know about. This is part of our story that, for a lot of very interesting historical and sociological reasons, have been left out of a lot of the conversation. But that's something that, from the time my boys were very little, we talked about. Every character that we learn about in the Torah and the Chumash, there's a woman supporting him, behind him. There's a woman raising the children that become, the next in our ancestor line. So I think it's important, especially in this day and age, especially with the consciousness that we have, to keep women part of the conversation in ways that are for everyone to learn about, and not just something that kind of gets, siphoned off to like, oh, this is something for women to know about. Everyone needs to know about the stories of these women.
Mhm. And that's true whether you're passing it on to children or even if you're not a mother and just want to make sure that Jewish women's history is not hidden and needs to come out for sure. Mayim, I also want to follow up with you about your podcast. First of all, Mazel Tov again. I'm winning 2 Webby Awards, which are big internet awards, for your Mayim Bialik's breakdown. So you've long been involved in health and wellness issues, being open and public about some of the health issues that you've experienced. Why and how did this podcast develop? And I'm curious to know if you see a connection between emotional well-being and chutzpah.
It's a good question. Honestly, we started, my partner Jonathan Cohen and I, we started this podcast at the beginning of COVID, in the beginning of the lockdown, when we realized that he and I, both with backgrounds and lots of experience in therapy and having a vocabulary about mental wellness, we realized we were freaking out and didn't understand what anticipatory anxiety was. And kind of the whole world got to learn about what anticipatory anxiety is. That's the anxiety about things that you cannot anticipate, like how long is this going to go on? Is it going to get worse? Am I going to get sick? What happens if I get sick? What if there's no vaccine? Things like that. So we started it really to try and democratize mental health. At that time, this was, 300 episodes ago. At that time, it was still kind of, taboo to talk about mental health. In those years, and I'm not saying we single-handedly changed that, but our culture has evolved to the point that everybody is talking about it now. And we deal with also more things about the intersection of science and spirituality. That's become a large component of understanding mental wellness for us. I think doing a podcast like this requires a lot of chutzpah, both for me and for Jonathan, because yes, vulnerability is a component of being a communicator. For me, I'm trained as a neuroscientist, so I'm a science communicator, and communicating all of these things does take a certain amount of vulnerability. But there's many aspects of our business that do involve trying to be seen, trying to be distinguished and noticed. And I think that there are certain things that we do that we feel do push the limits in some cases of a lot of people's comfort. But we think it's an important conversation to have. And I guess just sort of gets added to the things about me that I feel compelled to do to try and help other people.
Mm. So we have a lot of comments, mostly in the Q&A, praise for the book, and kol hakavod, and kol hakavod to you, Mayim, for everything that you are doing. One question, chutzpah sometimes has a negative view, especially when describing women. Did you get any sense of this when researching the topic and the stories of the women included in the book? Which one of you wants to handle that?
Sure, I can answer
Tami, go
that.
ahead.
Of course. Well, Lisa, you mentioned before how you were surprised that chutzpah is actually mentioned in the Talmud, and it's also mentioned in the it's mentioned a second time in the Talmud, and there it says chutzpah is effective even against the even against the heavens, indicating that it's such a powerful force that it could even alter a divine decree. And then the Talmud goes on to bring different examples of both positive and negative chutzpah. And I think it highlights the fact that just like any force, it can be used for good and for bad. And it all really depends on our intent.
I think that's a really good note to end on. I'm sorry to end because I think this conversation could go a lot longer, but I really want to thank you all so much for this engaging and inspiring conversation, something that we all need to think about more, and the positivity, the resilience, the not victimhood. We know we have an intergenerational crowd and hope that the discussions surrounding female chutzpah, role models, and acts of courage and heroism continue offline. If you can all just sit while we conclude with a few notes. I'm thrilled to announce, actually, some very big news that Hadassah Magazine Presents is launching a podcast. Very unique in the world, but it's unique for us. So we're very excited about it. The podcast, which will launch May 8th, will be a spin-off of these virtual and in-person programs. You'll still want to register for these live events to be part of the action, to be able to ask questions of our guests. But in case you miss it, you'll be able to get the podcast and listen while taking a walk, commuting, or cooking dinner. And you can share it with your family and friends. We're very excited about this. You'll be hearing more about it in the weeks ahead, but look for it in the podcast page of Hadassah.org and wherever you get your podcasts. And before I announce the winner of a complimentary copy of Chutzpah Girls, I want to alert you to two upcoming Hadassah Magazine programs. On Wednesday, May 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, join us for a conversation with Israeli author Ayelet Sabari, the acclaimed Israeli writer and winner of a National Jewish Book Award for fiction for her Songs for the Brokenhearted, a lyrical, multi-generational saga about love, loss, and the complex history of Yemenite Jews in Israel. This is going to be a really interesting one, and some of you are very well aware that we've been really highlighting Israeli authors, Jewish female authors, and especially at this time when they've been encountering a lot of difficulty in the publishing and sales world. Also on Wednesday, June 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be hosting a panel discussion with two impressive young women speaking up for Israel today, as well as some leaders working with Gen Z communities, including Adina Friedman, CEO of Young Judea, and David Hazoni, editor of the 2024 anthology Young Zionist Voices, A New Generation Speaks Out. The magazine is partnering with Hadassah's Education and Advocacy Division for the Young Zionist program. Links to register for both programs are in the chat box. As always, I'd like to extend a big thanks to Leah Finkelstein, the magazine's senior and book editor, who helped plan this program, and to the magazine's digital editor, Ariel Kaplan, who both promoted and produced it. And a shout out to our partners in the engagement and marketing divisions who are always instrumental with the details involved in making these events happen. And a huge thank you again to our guests, Mayim, Julie, and Tami, for an engaging, inspiring conversation about a topic dear to all of our hearts. Links to learn more about Chutzpah Girls and what they're continuing with this project, again, with a link to buy the book with a discount code, as well as links to Mayim's website and podcast are in the chat box. This info will also be available in an email in a few days for all who registered as well. I'm really glad you just held up that book, because one of the questions in the Q&A was, can we see a copy? If anybody who might have missed the opening slides, which did have a copy, which is beautiful. It really, and as Mayim indicated, we didn't get to discuss this, but there really is beautiful artwork that enhances the book tremendously. So now to announce the lucky person who'll receive a complimentary copy, Debbie Rudy, come on down. Rudoy, I'm not sure how I'm pronouncing it. Debbie Rudy, come on down. You'll receive an email from Ariel Kaplan with follow-up information about receiving your book. Congratulations, and a big thanks to all of you who joined us today. We encourage you all to come back for future programming. And until then, I wish a happy Mother's Day to all who are a mother, have a mother, and or have a mother figure to celebrate. Be sure to look out for Hadassah Magazine Presents podcast in the weeks ahead. Until then, Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Esther. Thank you, Hadassah.